I think we'd like to get started. First of all, I want to just thank everybody for coming out tonight. We are here for the Gas Emergency Impact Area Road and Sidewalk Restoration Project. It's an informational meeting. We have a quick presentation. We'll open it up to general questions. And then afterwards, we'll all be available to either sit in the back with the plans and we can talk about any specific questions you have about either in front of your house or any more specific detailed information. I just start by introducing myself. My name is Jim Stanford. I'm the Director of Public Works. My department will be overseeing the construction, which is a lot different than what happened during the emergency. That was a gas company run operation. We obviously would get told what was happening. We saw the construction, but this is a little different. The road restoration is actually our project, which means it's a town project. So certainly we're looking for input from the residents. I'm joined by Assistant Director John Bergese. He's also our town engineer. And the project engineer and manager, Curtis Johnson, on the end. He'll actually be handling the day-to-day operations once we get into construction. And I'm also joined by our consultant, Environmental Partners. We have Jim Fitzgerald, who will be doing a lot of the design work. And we also have Bruce Thibodeau here as well, who has helped out tremendously on this project. So with that said, I'll just go into the presentation. I have just a couple of general comments that I want to talk about, how we're going to set up tonight's meeting, and then I'll turn it over to John, and he can go into some more of the details. Most importantly, what I want everybody to understand is that this is just the first meeting. This is just an opportunity. We wanted to give a status update. It's not the last you're going to hear of this project. And because it's a town project, we'll give you our cards. You can call us at any time. So, and we think that's a little bit different than what everybody had to go through with the gas company. So if nothing else, just realize that this is a town project. We're here. The gas company is paying for it. There was a settlement last year, and so it's not town funds. However, as we go through the project, if there are things that we see that are outside of the impact area or that we can do better, we'll look to use some of our road funds because ultimately we want the best product. We know residents have put up with quite a bit. Last year was, and the year before when the emergency happened, it certainly was a trying time. We're left with a whole host of patches throughout town, and we'll certainly get into that and talk about what our plan is. Again, we have the contacts there. We'll be around afterwards. And like I said, we'll have other meetings as well. Once we actually get into the design of the individual sections of the projects, we'll have neighborhood meetings. And we'll have a better idea once we actually get into the design. I have an agenda, but ultimately what I really want to do is we're breaking the meeting up into three parts. The presentation, general questions, and then a chance for you to really ask specific questions. We're all here. We'll be here for whatever you need tonight. And then John will talk about the treatments, some of the things that we're going to try and accomplish with this project, and how we're going to solve, and the challenges we have, and how we're going to solve them. If we just look at a quick timeline, obviously the emergency happened on September 13th, 2018. The gas company went into restoration mode to restore and up their gas mains and services that were damaged. Our consultant Environmental Partners were the eyes and ears of Public Works out there. They were more or less looking at the road and the trench restoration. We knew it was a temporary restoration. You're still living with the temporary restoration. Then we got into the discussions after they got everybody gas up and running. We looked to discuss how we were going to get these roads, and it wasn't just North Andover. It was Andover, Lawrence, and as well the state was involved in those discussions. We finally reached the settlement in May 2019. The settlement identified the area, all the areas that were impacted, and the dollar amount. So as far as that goes, we have approximately 15 miles of roadway that was, not every inch of that of those mileage was ripped up, but those are the roads. It contains the roads that have the temporary patches, and we settled on a little more than $11 million as far as the restoration. Again, we'll be doing the restoration work, so those funds have already been deposited, so there's no town meeting approval we have to go through. We actually hope to get into construction very shortly, which we'll be talking a little bit more about. We've already done a needs assessment where we've identified all the roads. We looked at the condition. We started going through the process of what we believe has to be done in order to get these roads back up to a condition that we feel the road should be, which means that just about every road in the impact area will be repaved. In a lot of instances, it'll be more than just a layer of pavement. We're going to be taking out the old pavement. We're going to be looking at drainage. And the big part of it is going to be the sidewalks. As people have noticed, there are trenches all over the sidewalk and patches. Once you start a construction project as this, you actually trigger the ADA issues. So we have a lot of upgrades that we're going to have to do. A lot of decisions are going to have to be made as we go through the project. With that said, we identified the various areas within the project, within the impact area, and we've broken them up into contracts. Each contract, we actually started design and bid and actually contract award for the first area. We were scheduled to begin last fall. Unfortunately, the gas company was under enforcement orders where they had to do some compliance. I'm sure everybody's aware that the gas company was roaming around in the fall redoing some of the things, looking at the compliance checks. So we made a decision back then that we were going to step back, wait till they get through this compliance, which they have. They've since gone through that, and start fresh in the spring. So as soon as the weather allows, we have the contractor, we have the first contract on board. We're going to be actually working south of Route 125. There was a small area over by the school administration unit. So that's really where the project's going to start. And again, we hope to be under construction as soon as weather allows. Again, the 15 miles of impacted area, and they're generally bounded by Main Street, Waverly Road, Route 125, and Mass Ave. So we've actually been able to break it up into 5 contract areas. And as I mentioned, the impacts, everybody sees the trenches. I'd like to note that while it's our project now, until we actually go out to bid and contract for the various roads, the gas company is still responsible for maintaining the trenches. So we monitor them. If we find settlement, like right now, because they were temporary, most of them are just temporary pavement, the gas company does have to come back and maintain the trench, bring up any settlement till we can actually get out there. The project itself is anticipated, we're allowed 5 years according to the settlement. Last year was actually the first year, so we had 4 full construction years. However, given what the delay that they actually caused us, we've put in for another year. So it's a 5-year project to get everything done. But I want to mention up front, that doesn't mean that we're going to take a full 5 years. We plan on going through aggressively with all the contracts. We want the majority of the work done long before the 5 years. The 5 years is really going to give us more time to look at some of the major roads like Mass Ave, Main Street. There's some other projects that are ongoing right now. So some of those, the collector roads, we may have to delay a little bit longer. But our intent is to really get the neighborhood streets done sooner. Again, impacts the sidewalks. We've seen variable patches. We have concrete sidewalks where they put asphalt in. We've had curbing broke up. Again, what they've done is just a temporary patch and temporary restoration. There are a number of impacts that, as I mentioned with the ADA, that are going to be triggered by us going out there and actually doing this work. A lot of places in the town are sidewalks. They're old sidewalks. They weren't designed and constructed to modern standards. So by us going in and paving the road, we're actually triggering all the ramp improvements, putting in new ramps, crosswalks, curbing. So we have quite a bit of work to do. The intent also isn't that we're going to just do the ramps. Again, we expect that when we're through an area, it's going to look better than it did before we got there, or before the gas company got there. So we're treating this like this is just our ordinary roads program, and this is how we want to do the projects. We want as many new sidewalks as we can, reconstructed. We want new pavement. We want drainage improvements, because we know we have a lot of areas that could use that. We want restoration, side restoration, adjacent areas. And John will get into some of the I guess, challenges we have to get into that point. The other thing is with intersections. We do have a number of intersections that probably with whatever we can do construction-wise within the constraints, you have adjacent houses, and we're going to be limited as to what we can do at some of these intersections. But we're going to look at to see what, if we can realign, make some minor realignments. We do have to put in crosswalks. They don't exist everywhere now. And so we're going to have some challenges. One of the things this may lead to is because of the ADA requirements, there are going to be some existing constraints that we're just not going to be able to meet. So we'll have to go for waivers before the Architectural Access Board. But again, once we get into the design, we'll have a better idea. But we've already started thinking about some of these areas, and again, we've already done the assessment. I don't know if you can see that. And again, this will be posted to our website. John will talk a little bit more about that. The contract areas, again, there are 5. You can see, although I don't know if you can see that clearly, it's kind of far away. But we do expect contract 1, which is a pretty big area, but not a lot of streets. That's why we really chose it. And quite honestly, some of the streets in that area were already scheduled within our program. So it was a pretty good starting point to the project. I probably should mention that as well. Unfortunately, within the gas impact area, not every roadway was had trenches. So we have some streets within some of the contract areas that aren't part of the gas company payment, but we can't go into an area and then leave a street in poor condition adjacent to some of the other streets. So we are going to take this neighborhood approach. We're going to break these contracts up. We're going to look at individual areas. We still have to have design. We still have to have some survey. Some areas are going to be more challenging than others, just because of the condition of some of the existing sidewalks, some of the existing infrastructure. We've already started looking to see if we need water and sewer upgrades. For the most part, we don't, but I'm sure as we're going through the projects, we may find some upgrades that are needed, and that may change some of the scheduling. So we have put together a draft timeline, and again, using the full 5 years, or in this case 4 based on last year, but we may have to rearrange. The contracts go 1 through 5. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do them sequentially. Once we actually do the survey on the ground and get out there and start the design, we may have other challenges. So we expect to do just a rolling project. So we're already looking at contract 2 now. So it's just going to be a continual process. And again, it's a draft because we wanted public input. These are our ideas. We do a lot of road work. We have our reasons why we chose the contracts the way we did. And we have tried to look at some of the timing of the other projects. Right now, Mass Ave is under construction through the state. We're going to try and time it so that when they're done with the major construction, possibly we'll be doing a good portion of Mass Ave. But we'll have to see as we go along. And again, we don't want to get away from that neighborhood approach. The last thing we want to do is go into an area, construct one street, disrupt traffic, and we know there's going to be disruptions, every construction project, and then leave an area and then have to come back. The goal here is that once we start your area, construction-wise, we're going to go through till it's complete. And I think that's very important, because I know during the gas emergency, the restoration didn't look like that. They were jumping from one area to the other to meet their needs, whatever they needed to do. Road construction is a little bit different. We should be able to, I think, stick to that neighborhood approach. That way, again, we know it's going to be disruption. We absolutely know that, but we don't want to continually have to come back. The other aspect of this is we want to do it right the first time. We don't, if we can solve a problem with a little bit of design work in looking at it and speaking to the residents, that's the approach that we want to take. So we don't have unlimited funds. Again, we have a little over $11 million. Seems like a lot of money. Asphalt is very expensive. The bulk of it is going to be within the asphalt and on the sidewalks. We're not going to be able to put granite curbing and concrete sidewalks everywhere, but we're going to be making trade-offs. Some areas may make sense to use asphalt. Some may make sense to use concrete. John will get into some of the slope treatments of the curbing that we can use. And I think, so with that, I think I'll turn it over to John and let him talk about some of the challenges and some of the treatments that we have.
Thanks, Jim. So as Jim indicated, obviously, there's a lot going on with all the restoration. And what I'm going to talk about is essentially the goals with the restoration, but then also some of the major challenges that we have, which is why we want to reach out to the public to get your input on how we deal with these challenges, before it goes to design, and then, of course, when it gets to the construction phase. So the goals for the restoration, obviously, is to address all of the impacted roadway pavement. And as Jim indicated, we do want to look at it as a neighborhood approach, so that we're not coming in and just paving, say, in the settlement, it went halfway down the road. Well, you know what, we're going to pave the entire road. And what we're hoping to do is supplement maybe settlement funds with existing local funds we have in our annual paving program. So an example of that, the contract one that we've already put out, along the entire, probably half mile of Osgood Street was inside the settlement. When Jim and I looked at it, I said, we're not going to pave just half of Osgood. Let's pave the whole thing. So we looked at our annual funds for paving, and we included the entire Osgood Street. That way the whole street's done, all paved at the same time, and it's not you're stopping, mid-block or whatnot. So that's definitely one of the major details that we definitely want to look at, again, during the design and engineering stage before it goes out to construction.
Excuse me, that's the section of Osgood Street that extends from, it's merger with Route 125 towards Mass Ave?
125 towards.
Section of Osgood Street that is also Mass, that is also 125.
Sure. Sorry.
Thank you very much. You're referring to the section of Osgood Street that essentially runs past North Andover High School?
Correct. Yes, starts at Main Street and goes all the way to 125.
Yes.
That's the entire length.
Yes. Thank you.
So as Jim indicated, one of the things that we need to look at is once we get into this is we have to comply with the ADA compliance, upgrade the wheelchair ramps and whatnot, potentially file for waivers. in similar addressing the sidewalk restoration where we're just not going to repair where the trench is, looking at it neighborhood approach, entire sidewalk approach, you know, whether it's the materials, you know, curbing, we're going to look at it, go the whole length that we can. That makes sense for those areas. In addition, we're going to use, we have a sidewalk connectivity program that the town, we're working on the plan currently, and where it makes sense, you know, and overlaps with the connectivity program, potentially use existing funds to extend the sidewalks. It doesn't make sense to have all this work done and then come in a year from now and be like, oh, we want to extend the sidewalk we just repaired, so let's put it all in the package now and get it together. And lastly, of course, is the drainage upgrades where they're necessary, where we've seen them, you know, which can consist of catch basins falling in, you know, drain manholes. We're not going to just, you know, raise them up and walk away. We're going to assess it. If the whole structure needs to be replaced, let's replace it now so we're not coming back in there 5 years from now having to do that. Okay, we'll get into a little bit of the existing situations that we're looking at, sidewalks and parking. This is a perfect example of where all of a sudden a sidewalk ends. It just stops. So this is one where we're going to look at, okay, does it make sense to actually continue to connect this from further down, include that in the actual package for the restoration, so we're doing it all at once. Here you can see there's poor, you know, obviously the slabs of the concrete, poor sidewalks. Flipping, we slow it down. And then we also had the inconsistent sidewalk materials where we have both combinations in places of just asphalt and concrete. Again, we're going to look at it and what makes sense to use a consistent material in that area as funds are available. Sidewalks and parking. This is actually a big challenge that we have. As you can see, we have flush sidewalks, parking on the sidewalk. You know, definitely one of the major challenges we're going to have looking through these contracts in the different areas is how do we handle situations like this, and what is it that the public wants to see. You know, we are, for safety purposes, the goal is to keep the pedestrians separate, have a separation from pedestrians and the vehicles. So when you have flush sidewalks, there's not much of a separation there. But then again, the question is, okay, if we put a separation in, does it mean it eliminates the parking? Can you still park? You know, so these are definitely some of the challenges that we're looking at, hoping to get some feedback from the neighborhoods. Next one. So this, we're actually just going into, and here we're going into, we have situations existing on the top, and then some of the possible alternatives that we're looking to get feedback on is, again, putting in, this is a splayed edge granite curving, which does provide that separation, but will still allow mounting. You know, so cars could still mount, park half on the road, half on the sidewalk, but it does provide more of a separation than just like, in some places it's a flush asphalt berm, so there's almost no separation at all. Go ahead. Here we have another potential option. You install a traditional granite curb where you cannot mount it. Notice you essentially lose parking on one side of the roadway. You provide the parking on the opposite side and then the two travel ways. Again, it does provide that separation between the pedestrians and the vehicles. It also means there's no mounting of the curb or potentially, and you lose parking on one side. Just another alternative that's there that we need to, you know, consider looking at these different areas. Here we have an alternative for roadway widening. So where the right-of-way is available, there's a potential where we could look at widening the road, increasing the travelway to provide both parking on both sides and a travelway both directions. And then we would provide a separation for the pedestrians. Maybe in a situation like this where the right-of-way isn't available, another consideration would be if where we have sidewalk on both sides, maybe we eliminate sidewalk on one side. That would allow us sufficient area to be able to continue with, parking on both sides and travel lanes, but just have sidewalk on one side. In the situation where we're widening, one of the big challenges is essentially the features outside the sidewalk, whether it's fencing, vegetation, plantings, walls, retaining walls. A lot of these places have retaining walls, so that definitely makes it more challenging and obviously drives the cost up for restoration on what we could do in situations like that. Here we have examples of elevated sidewalks and driveways. So Marblehead and Waverly Road, where you have a significant elevation difference between the roadway and where the sidewalk is, and leading into the driveways. So this is another area where, trying to figure out, okay, what are the different alternatives we could come up with in situations like these. And I'll show you some graphics. Here you can see, an existing section where we have the steep grass slopes, steep driveways. It's the elevated sidewalk scenario. One of the potential considerations is maybe we raise the entire roadway in that section. There are sections in both Waverly and Marblehead where it looks as though, once we get the survey, we'll know a little better, but it may make sense. We'll elevate the roadway, eliminate the steep grass slopes, ease the transitions for the driveways. It is a little bit more costly. We have to bring more material in, but again, in situations like this, now's the time to do it, and if it makes sense. Trees, street trees. As everyone's aware, all over, we have street trees, existing street trees, that a lot of them have been trimmed and pruned and whatnot over years. Here's a perfect example. Trees that were installed underneath the utilities over time, they've pruned the trees, and essentially your street tree, shade tree is a nice big V, because they cut out the center. Situations like that, we need to take that into consideration also. Along with the trees, of course, comes the roots. As I'm sure you all know, our sidewalks have a lot of tree roots. Over the years, the trees have grown bigger and bigger, and when they weren't provided sufficient area to grow, so as the roots grow, they drive up the sidewalk. They break the asphalt apart, drive up the concrete pads, create tripping hazards, ADA compliance issues. So again, and this is all over the area. And the minimal grass strips, a lot of times is you almost never see grass growing there, because providing 2 feet of grass, again, in New England where we have sand and salt, you can almost never get the grass to grow. It's not a big enough area. So some of the considerations is, okay, well, maybe in those areas we'll eliminate the grass strip, which would provide us more room, and/or with the trees, instead of putting a tree right on the edge, maybe we put it behind the sidewalk, where it has more area to grow. And potentially, if residents are amenable, we could actually put it on the private property and they can maintain it. There's definitely areas where existing trees will have to come down. And we recognize how important they are in our tree planting program, and we will have a 1-to-1 replacement ratio on the trees. But what we don't want to do is install a tree where, again, 10 years from now, we're dealing with the same situations. The trees have grown, the roots, they've impacted the sidewalk. So we just want to make sure we look at it now to determine where's the best placement for the tree that we're going to replace, knowing that we are going to have to take existing trees down in certain neighborhoods.
If I can add, in some instances, it may make sense to plant the trees on the other side of the street. Because again, you're not getting much shade from this. Once we, and I should add, we'll be looking at all these trees. We'll probably be having tree hearings. We know this is a sensitive issue, but as John mentioned, we recognize it's part of the character of the town. That's not something we want to come in and change. So, we'd love to hear from residents if they want a tree in front of their house or willing to put it on their property. It's a real priority. It's absolutely a priority to this.
Yep, just one more. Here you can see, again, just to reiterate, the drainage upgrades where necessary. In the photo, you can see the catch basin that's essentially falling in. In situations like that, we are going to take that into account and include in the contracts that would be a replacement. We'll replace the whole catch basin, new frame and grate, so that we don't have, we're not coming back in a couple of years, and now starting to rip up and having to patch. We actually already have some areas where we do know we have drainage issues that we're going to include in the contracts, just existing stuff that we haven't been able to get to, but now we're going to use the funds and include it in the contract to make sure it's done at the same time. Yep.
So those are really some of the challenges that we have. Again, we haven't started the survey, physical survey, where we go out with the survey equipment and start identifying exactly where all these obstructions are. So I think I'd just like to take a minute and just kind of explain how we go through these projects. And again, Curtis Johnson down at the end, he'll really be the one that's overseeing this. He may not be the one out there with the survey instrument, but he'll know what's going on. The contractor, the engineers will be scheduling the work through him. So at any time, again, you can call us, talk to Curtis or any one of us, and he'll be able to give you up-to-date information. We're also going to have a website put up. The website is actually in place. It's on one of the handouts that we have. We're going to be updating it as we get into construction. And I have included, we obviously have a sign-in sheet and comment sheet. So feel free to write up on the comment sheet, and we'll look at every concern, especially once we get into an area. But as far as the construction goes, it's initially you start with the plan, where you look at the area. Then you go out, you do a field assessment. Not every area is going to require a full survey. So, you may have a pretty straightforward street where, in some instances, believe it or not, the road was paved within the last 10 years. The road isn't that bad. Sidewalk isn't that bad. Things are pretty well defined. We may be able to come in and just reclaim the roadway where you you grind up the pavement, put new asphalt down, maybe make some upgrades to the sidewalk to make sure that it's completely ADA compliant, and then we're out of there. Other areas are going to take a lot of design, a lot of looking at, because once we introduce curbing in some of those areas like John had mentioned where you don't have curbing, you don't have that break or that separation, we need to introduce the curbing, which then we have to do drainage design, which takes a little bit more. Then you have to look at where you're going to outlet this water, because the curbing's going to pond it, we're going to collect it, we're going to have to put it somewhere. And we have some permitting that we'll have to do for that. From a resident's perspective, though, you'll start seeing activity. Most of the time, the activity that you see out on the street will be the survey. You'll see dig safes. We're trying to locate, where all the water services are, where all the gas services are. Yeah, we know where the gas, exactly. That's one of the benefits of the trenches. So we try to avoid those. But you'll see this activity. Once we get the survey done, then it goes into the consultant. They start looking at, what they need to accomplish to make sure that there are no drainage issues. You'll start seeing people out there with vests on, looking. And most of the time, it's just an investigation. A lot of times what we end up doing, John, Curtis, and I, is when it rains out, we actually go and we drive the road, we'll walk the road with the video camera, and then go back and sit in the office and look through the tape to see where these drainage problems are. Nothing's worse than doing a new roadway and then having a drainage problem. We look at driveways, slopes of driveways, direct impacts to abutters. The intent of this, as John mentioned, we may have to raise the road in some instances. For the most part, we plan on keeping the road elevations the same, unless it makes sense to change it. We may lower it a couple inches to get better drainage, but again, we have to look at we have to look at driveways to make sure we're not causing you a problem. And then once we get a design together, what we'll probably do is we'll schedule resident meetings. Now, this meeting here, we didn't send out 10,000 notices. We posted it on the website, mentioned it at the Board of Selectmen meeting. When we get into the resident meetings and we're on the street level, not on the big area, we'll actually send notices out to you. But again, you can always call us at any time. And we'll have another forum like this where we're talking specifically about individual roads. The other thing that we may do, if we have some challenges, for instance, boy, we may need to talk to a resident. We could get a better product if we may have to change the slope of your side slope. It's your property. You would have to give us permission to do that. So a lot of times we're getting temporary easements, right of entries. We don't have a right to go onto your property outside of the right of way and start digging. We're not the gas company. and again, so working for a town, we work for you. So we obviously want to talk to you if we're going to cause an impact or if we can get a better product. And the best place to do that a lot of times is right out at your property so we can show you some of these constraints. And then once we get the design issues, and we can't solve them all. Again, we don't have unlimited budget, and we have to make it last for the entire. We don't want to gold plate the streets in the beginning so that when we get to the end we don't have any money. We have to look at, we have to make trade-offs. So again, our goal is to make everything better than before we got there. And then once we feel we have a good design, we'll put it out to bid. We'll get all of these will have to be public bid, just like the first one. And generally, that takes about a month of bidding, month and a half. And we try and time them so that we're either going out to bid early winter or we're trying to stay ahead so that we're ready as soon as the ground is ready and weather complies, we're ready to go. That's when you'll see all the impact. And that's when, again, you'll probably have more interactions with us. There will be road closures. You'll always have access to your property, but we know there'll be some inconveniences. So the more discussions we can have one-on-one, the better it is. Because just like with the gas emergency, what we saw just as town staff and as residents, that the lack of information is where the problem. If you just know that the gas company was going to be on your street, you could have planned your activities, and that wasn't always achievable. We try and, that's going to be one of our goals, so that you know what we're doing. And then typically, again, some of these streets, it's going to be, some of them are going to be straightforward and pretty quick. Some of them are going to take a few months, depending on the amount of drainage work we have to do. But again, we want to do it right, and we want to do it once. We don't want to have to come back. And then ideally, get the road paved before the fall. We really have a short window of construction, of real construction. It's generally June to September where you don't have school, because once you have the school buses rolling, it really slows construction down. We don't work on Saturdays typically unless there's some reason. We don't work at night unless there's a reason. I can foresee places like Main Street, Waverly Road, Sutton Street, Mass Ave. There may be some times when we need to work at night, but generally this is being done during the day. With that said, we do construction during school season, and there's a lot more coordination with the schools and the buses because children have to get to school, and there's more traffic. During the summer, it's a better time, but it is such a short window, and we have a lot of work to do. So some of these contracts, we may start in the summer. We may not finish everything, final paving, till the following spring. But what we'll always try and do is get the binder down, which is the first level of asphalt, and then generally sometimes we'll let it sit over the winter and then put the final wearing course in the striping last. But a lot of that scheduling will depend once we actually get into an area. And again, we've been doing this a long time. It's when you get into these areas, that's when residents really, they want to know what's happening in front of their house, on their street, and we'll have a better idea. If you ask me tonight, I won't be able to tell you what I'm doing on your street, with the exception of that contract one, which is really there aren't a lot of roads that are impacted by that. But once we get into the survey design, we'll have a much better idea. And again, Curtis he'll be overseeing that. He's not going to be inspecting every day. He'll be in the office. He'll be out meeting with residents. He'll be overseeing the inspectors who will be working for the town. They'll all be contracted. And then, again, we'll be controlling all the expenditures. We'll be controlling the contractors. They'll be working for the town. With that said, unless there's anything else anybody wants to add, I'll open it up to general questions. And then, like I said, we've got plenty of time. There aren't a lot of residents here. We can certainly sit down and we can lay out the plans because we have laid out areas and identify any specific concerns you have.
Hi, good evening. Elvin Sargent Street. My name is Kevin. Question is going to be multi-level layered. From what I gather, you did a needs assessment, but it sounds like it's incomplete. Is that true?
The needs assessment is the overall.
I understand.
Yeah.
I know how to do one in several venues. I guess what I'm getting at is you have contract areas, and I'm trying to determine how you determine why that contract area one gets a higher priority. Because I can tell you right now, to be very blunt and simple, you're not going to be able to plow Sargent Street next year, as a result of what Columbia Gas did. It's fundamentally it's going to be unmaintainable from that perspective. I can pretty much assure you. So why weren't we elevated in later priority? Because it looks like from your schedule, I'll either be dead or living in Florida by the time you get to it.
I hope that's not the case. But as I mentioned,
that's what it's looking like.
As I mentioned,
it's basically impractical. Why weren't we elevated in priority based upon the condition of our street and not based on our median property value? Because it seems like starting around that section of Osgood Street where the properties have a very high property value, it seems like they're getting more priority.
Yeah, that wasn't the case. It was really the matter of we didn't have a lot of time for design, and that was the quickest area where we could kick off the project. As far as the existing condition, we know that there are condition issues. We know, again, we're starting to see potholes now because of the thawing that's been going on. But as I mentioned, until we actually put a street like Sargent Street into a contract, the gas company is supposed to maintain it. So we can certainly call them as a town, and we will be looking. The other thing that I'll mention is that if there's an area where we're having trouble plowing, we can do temporary repairs. We don't like to do Band-Aids, and as far as priority, you have to. We didn't want to start breaking individual streets. We have to look at the entire area.
Okay, well, then you should probably backcharge Columbia Gas because last year, the town of North Andover was patching Sargent Street on areas that Columbia Gas had excavated. I know what's been said, but I know what's also been done.
Yeah.
It's a mess. I've traveled third world countries that have roads better than my street. Mm-hmm. And I kid you not.
Oh, believe me, we
so
know the conditions.
I dare say, based upon the condition of that general area, Hodges, Belmont, May, that little block down there of very old homes of modest people with modest means, it should be raised in priority because essentially it's like a third world country down there.
I mean, you're making a great point. You really are as far as the condition. I want to say, first of all, it has nothing to do with the value of the houses. Certain areas are going to take much longer with design because of the constraints. We were just on May Street. We were doing some other work over in that area. So, as I said earlier, if we need to jump contracts around, we're going to do that. This was our first stab at what we see. And that's why we're having these meetings. And certainly we'll go back and we'll take a look at that.
I was wondering which contract Middlesex Street is under, and is Middlesex Street the same as, is the contract the same as Phase? I was told we were Phase 2.
Yeah, we're not using phases. We're using the actual contracts because some of these will go quicker than others. And like I said, this is a draft. So we can lay out the plans, and we'll be happy to stick around and actually show you where you are, at least in the contracts. But again, if we can't do 15 miles of roadway in 1 year. We just can't do it. We can't dig up the entire town. We had to kind of set areas, and this was our first stab at it.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you, what is this going to do to the town's schedule that's the normal paving schedule? Is that still going to happen? And then, considering that we're going to have all of this paving happening in North Andover, Lawrence, and in Andover, are there enough paving contractors out there to get this all done?
That's an excellent question. It really is. So I mean, the first part, there are a lot of streets that are being done, and as far as the regular schedule, we have a few miles that we had already are in our plan that we're working on. That's separate from this contract. If there are a few instances where we're going to adjust that schedule to make it more, I guess we get better value. So if we have a road, let's say, in the area of an impact area, but not on the schedule, or not in the gas emergency, but it was going to be paved 3 years from now, we may up that, which means that we may have to delay another road, if it makes sense. The other part to it is we're not going to, we know there's going to be a lot of construction going on. We're trying to time these as best as possible. Most often, though, with those other road work, they're generally just overlays, which are most often just a couple of days where you adjust the castings. We're not doing major drainage improvements. We're taking a different approach here. This is a real rehabilitation of an entire area. So that part we will schedule, and we will continue to do our regular work. There may be some instances where we have to adjust, but at least that's what we're planning on doing. As far as the contractors, that's a great discussion. We've talked an awful lot about that. I will tell you, with the first bid that we put out, it was later than the other towns had already started. We got very good prices, and we got a very good contractor. So we're very excited about that. We've had contractors coming on into us. There are a few major paving companies in the area. They're all interested in doing this work. This is quite a bit of work. They will accommodate what we need.
Why are we so far behind Andover and Lawrence in getting started?
I wouldn't say we're behind. They were a little more aggressive. They had some things under. I'll tell you, in the case of Lawrence, they started before the settlement, so we had to wait. We decided to wait. We would have already been under construction had it not been. We made a decision that it didn't make sense with the gas company. They weren't able to tell us exactly where they were going to be, because they had to come back and they had to do what they're calling, it was compliance. But I can tell you there were instances in the other communities where they had either started paving a road, started constructing, and then the gas company came in and they dug up what they had just done. So we made that decision, and that's where we're at. I think I look at it a little bit differently, because had we done something, we'd have to, if we had started, we may have to redo things. And I can tell you that one of the streets that was in our program, the gas company did dig in the road. So I don't think we're under design. We also had the other part where we had to do the field maintenance over. So we started that. That's already under construction. But the other aspect too is, like I said, we're taking the approach. We're not just coming in and repaving the roadways. And I can't speak for Andover or Lawrence. Again, they have their own program. We're trying to do this right. And a little bit of design time and a little bit of thought and a little bit of more public input, I think we're going to get a better product.
Curious about the contracts that you're going out to bid on. A couple things. So I think it's called the apron on the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
It's from the trench. It's just
Okay.
It's a disaster. But aside from that, that has led us to thinking, well, when we're paving the road, we should take advantage of maybe some efficiencies with the contractors that are contracted to do the work. Is there any consideration that you're talking with those contractors and vendors about for residents to be able to take advantage of some potential efficiencies and savings to do their own driveway, for example, at the same time?
I will tell you from the standpoint of doing road work in communities for 30 years, that's not something towns usually get involved in. We're responsible. We have to adjust your driveway. If we make changes in the roadway, we have to make it, typically the apron is done. How far back you go, that's something that will depend on once we get out in the field. Generally, the contractors, and I probably should have mentioned this, because these aren't, the other aspect of breaking these contracts up the way we did is the dollar value, what we would anticipate for each one of these contracts, is fairly significant. So we hope to get larger contractors, better value. Generally, the larger contractors don't like to get involved in driveway paving. Their road construction, their road paving, generally you're looking at smaller companies that would do the paving of driveways. So it's not something we typically do. One of the things we do in this instance is we try and, with the information, let residents know that you don't want to go and pave your driveway prior to us paving the roadway. You're far better to wait. And we'll certainly discuss scheduling with you and all that. But getting into the actual getting contractors to do private paving, that's not something towns typically do.
Typical, but none of this situation has been typical for anybody.
No, it hasn't.
And
I would agree with that.
It would have been nice, or would be nice, as, it's a town project, it's town folks that are involved. If there's, I don't know, maybe we do it a little differently. It's not the same thing that we've always done with our roads. And I understand big contractors, et cetera, but that's the reason I ask. So it might be something that we want to consider.
We can certainly talk to them. Yeah, we can certainly look at
have a
it.
Conversation with them.
Absolutely.
Or if it's not them, are there others that you can help facilitate that process with residents about? But that's my one question. I have more, but.
What's the criteria that you're using to determine if you're going to get concrete or asphalt sidewalks? Because on our street, our neighbors on one side have concrete and we have asphalt, and I want concrete.
As I said, I think a lot of it, we would prefer to do concrete, absolutely. It's a more durable product. It lasts a lot longer. There are some considerations, though, just like with the trees. So if we're going to be planting trees, or if there are existing trees that the roots, let's say, aren't so bad, but if we were to use concrete, the panels are going to pop up. Asphalt, on the other hand, is more flexible. So we have to look at those. In general, though, I would look to see if the majority of the roadway is concrete, we would look to keep that concrete. We're not trying to change the character of neighborhoods. As we've gone through this, and I think we actually put a plan together where we have concrete, where we have patches of asphalt. Generally, if it's more than 50% bitumen, or cement concrete, we'd like to keep that. But again, we may have to make some trade-offs because depending on what the curbing treatments are, John had mentioned that they do have that mountable granite curbing, it's twice as expensive as regular granite curbing. So we can't do everything, but if we can keep the concrete, that's really our preference.
But I want to make sure that, one neighborhood isn't getting all this nice stuff and we're stuck with asphalt and our neighborhood looks dumpy. Middlesex Street is a very busy street and a lot of people are cutting through. So I pay just as much taxes as the other people in neighborhoods, and I want the same.
Yeah, no, the
I
intent.
want to have a conversation when you make that decision, because I want to weigh in on my street.
Absolutely. So the question was, certain streets that have cement concrete, and we hear that from residents, even what we've been going out there. There isn't a have and have-nots. We're not making decisions based on the assessed value of a property. We're making decisions based on what's out there and what makes sense for the area. Again, I mentioned the granite curbing. Our preference would be to put granite curbing everywhere, okay? It's not going to be practical because when you put granite curbing in a lot of instances, regular straight granite curbing, you prevent the parking. We know that in some areas that's not going to be a feasible alternative. Conversely, we're kind of stuck because in a lot of instances, or I should say, you shouldn't be parking on a sidewalk. And these are some of the discussions we're going to have neighborhood. And I know I'm getting away from your comment about cement versus bituminous. Bituminous is a third of the price, a quarter of the price. But if it makes sense, we're going to continue with the concrete. Now, maybe in some instances we have to we'll use the cement concrete, but asphalt berm, okay, as a trade, because we can't, as I mentioned, we cannot put vertical granite curbing and concrete sidewalks everywhere. The other thing that enters into that decision is there a grass strip between the edge of the pavement and the curbing and the sidewalk? Do we have enough room? And possibly in some of these areas, again, these are some of the areas we'll be talking to residents with. But to your point, we want to hear feedback, what you want. Middlesex makes sense. It's a major road. I will say generally we take, with the neighborhood approach, local roads are a little bit different. When you get onto these side roads, generally you have slower traffic. A road like Middlesex, we'd love to see granite curbing and concrete sidewalks. So those are some of the decisions we think of. But again, as I stressed in the beginning, this is a town project. You have input in this. We're not dictating to you. That's why we're having these meetings.
So on that whole issue of sidewalks, I'm hoping that you guys are going to price it out first so that you can see that at a minimum, even if you're going to have some asphalt sidewalks, that I hope that you'll at least make sure that there's a curb as well. Because I think that in some places we've seen, like on Middlesex, that we had just an asphalt sidewalk with no curb for part of that, and that was done maybe, I don't know how many years ago, at least 5. But what we found over the years now is that actually it's kind of sunk down, and so it's even, not only does it not look that good, but it's a danger to the pedestrians. Because I think that sometimes cars can't see, what the difference is. So I think that should be, price it out and let's have a minimum of having a curb. I also think that it seems that it preserves the sidewalk better if it has a curb on it. So
you're absolutely right. And again, we really want to put curbing and to provide that safety barrier. Again, we're looking at this sidewalks. It's a safety issue. I mean, right. And we want to encourage people to use the sidewalks.
Exactly.
And that's why we're going to be struggling in some of these areas where we know there's not enough. You don't have off-street parking, and there's not enough street parking. But as a general rule, yes, we absolutely want to put curbing. We've already started looking at that.
And then the other thing is that you see on the bottom of contract 4 where there's Mass Ave and then there's a bunch of streets that aren't going to get paved at all. You see that at the bottom of underneath, but it's still the same neighborhood. And that it's like we've got Mifflin Road, and half of Mifflin is going to be paved and not the bottom half. So considering that's contract 4, of course, it is true I live in that area, but I think that maybe you guys should look at, for property values and for consistency, if all the roads around that neighborhood are paved, but ours are not, and it's been over 10 years, maybe you could add that to the schedule of normal town, like, redo around, if that's the 4th one, that's 2024, 2024, yeah? I think more or less. So we'd appreciate that, so that it's not that now we're in the part of town that has no roads upgraded and all our neighbors around us do. Just
Yeah, and
something to
that's
keep in
a
mind.
good point. That's one of the things I think John had mentioned that we're actually looking at. So we have a pavement management system townwide. We know what the conditions of all the roads are. We are in the process of updating that. We do set a 5-year schedule, and then we project beyond that as we run the different alternatives, and it's based on budget. We typically spend roughly about $1.2 million in our annual roads program. Yes, if it makes sense, we don't want to go into an area, pave as part of the gas emergency, and then 3 years later, oh, lo and behold, the adjacent road is in the program. If it makes sense, we'll do it. We can't do everything, so we do have limited funds. But again, once we explain this to residents, generally they understand. So if you're on a street that was scheduled to be done, let's say next year, but we have to bump you a year so we can get a street, we can jump ahead of you, and it makes sense, we're going to get better value. That's good road management. So yes, we will be looking at that.
And just so you know, too, that Putnam Road is just one down from one that is being paved. Actually, the gas company was through our street maybe a year before the gas disaster. So we already have, a trench that was done and is black-topped over. So so that's the way it is. But that's why I say that would be a road to add into the town paving, since we already have a trench down the middle.
Yeah, that was one of the things. It was actually a little frustrating from our perspective because there are a few roads like that. There are a few roads that are just outside of the gas emergency, the impact area, and yes, they upgraded their main, and so that's why we're looking to see where we can extend that. But yeah, we've seen those trenches. Mass Ave is a perfect example of that. Heavily traveled road, half the roadway, they just did the main within the past 3 years. And fortunately, one of the things that we have done from a town perspective, John could speak a lot to this, is we have utility meetings every year in advance of our roads program. So we give the utility companies, all of them, these are the roads we're anticipated paving. If you need to do upgrades to your main, get them done now, because then we're going to pave the roadway. Mass Ave is a perfect example of that. We actually have funding. We've put the roadway sections that we were going to do on hold pending this project. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes the utilities come to us. They've done it the past 3 years. Oh, we absolutely have to upgrade this main. We found a problem. But yeah, I can tell you that's very frustrating from our perspective, because we do see these trenches that are 2 years old and they weren't part of the gas emergency. If there aren't any other questions, like I said, we can actually lay out the plans of the individual sections. I think there are enough of us that, we can certainly spend whatever time you need. We had scheduled till 9, but again, I can't stress enough. We work for the town. You can call us. We'll give you our cards. You can call us at any time. So with that, again, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate this. Thank you.